Hello, I'm Rushif, and in this video I'm going to be covering just about everything there is to know about the Capture the Wool game mode in past, present, and future. I'm going to be doing my best to present this information in a way that is both interesting and relevant to both newcomers to the game mode and veterans of CTW, as it's called. Specifically, I'll be covering the history and evolution of CTW and how its key features set it apart from similar game modes like Capture the Flag, the past and current state of the competitive CTW metagame after years of refinement, and the future of the game mode in the Overcast Network's absence. This video is being recorded in one take and won't be edited, but I will put timestamps around this area for these quote-unquote sections of the video. Also, as an added bonus, near the end of the video, I'll be releasing this officially revamped version of Golden Drought 3 for public usage, and I will be revealing Golden Drought 5, so keep your eyes peeled for that. We're going to start by going into the history of the Capture the Wool game mode, but in order to do that, we're going to have to go pretty far back to 2011. Now, back in 2011, Minecraft is still technically in beta. It's an endless beta. It's never going to be a finished game. Mojang is always going to put out updates. But before Minecraft is officially released, nothing is very solid. And back in this time period, this is the time period where people are still getting used to bows having drawback. This is how old this is. Now, one of the most popular custom map series at this time is Super Hostile, which is a series by Vex. And what Super Hostile is it's this horrible custom environment. Not horrible in that it's bad, horrible in that it's super difficult. It's a custom environment. It's a custom survival map made from the ground up, built mostly in MC Edit. And there's all these dungeons, and at each dungeon, there's different resources that are fairly sparse compared to a regular playthrough of a survival world. And each dungeon has a wool at the end of it, which you must capture and bring back to a victory monument. And there's all 16 colors. If this sounds familiar to you, good. Because this is what starts this capture. It's called Complete the Monument, CTM. But this idea of capturing the wool and placing it on a victory monument has roots all the way back here. I don't actually know when the Super Hostile series started. I'm pretty sure it started back all the way in 2010, some of the first maps. Anyways, for whatever reason, in 2011, Vex comes out with a series of multiplayer maps called Race for Wool. Now, what we're looking at here is what is with my sensitivity? This is Direct Fire, which is the first race, or not the first. This is the second Race for Wool map. Let me get back to the spawn real quick. I do not have permission to kill myself. All right, great. Now, what's interesting about this is it's sort of a miniature CTM in that there are 3 wolves. You gotta get them on your victory monument. There's different dungeons you gotta go in to do that. But what sets this apart is that you're up against another team and you're racing. And not only are you racing, but you're racing parallel to each other. And you can sabotage each other with cannons. And just to give you an idea of what cannons meant back in this period of time, there are some pre-made ones all the way up here. And they're interesting. Anyways, this is big. Race for Wool is pretty big back in this period of time, and still kind of is. Not the same level. It never was huge and had its own dedicated server because by nature it's a very small game mode and is better suited for organized matches. But organized matches of Race for Wool are really cool, and new stuff is constantly discovered. I picked this map because this one was a classic and kind of still is. It's been pushed to the metagame for Direct Fire has been pushed to such an extreme that it's almost unplayable at some of the higher levels of play. But it's still a very cool map. Regardless, some very interesting features to take away from this is even before with the CTM maps is the safe zone wool boxes. which was something before, and the lane layout separated by void gaps, which sticks around all the way through its development into CTW. Now, back in this period in 2011, me personally, some of this history is going to be my personal involvement with it, because I have some history with it. Back in 2011, I made CTM maps. I made a map called Solar Survival, which was just a bunch of circles, a bunch of spheres floating in the void, and they look kind of like planets. And for whatever reason, some YouTuber picked it up, and they got really popular. So I never made a sequel. I tried a few times, but I never got the motivation to. But I was a fairly successful one-time map maker at the time. And I was a big follower of Vex because I made CTM maps, and I looked up to him because he made some pretty crazy stuff, some very innovative things. And I thought to myself, what if instead of having two lanes where the defenses are you shooting your opponent and whatever dungeons are in it, what if you had one lane and your wool room was at the other side? And this was a novel concept at the time. Let me see if I can find... Right, okay. So I went to Vex. I found him on the Minecraft forums, and I pitched this idea to him. This was November 2011, and this is a really old-ass website that I guess is still around. And because I was making some sort of spin-off, and I wanted some excuse to talk to the guy who I idolized, I messaged him, and he thought it was a good idea, and he actually made his own CTW map. He released his first. Let me see if I can find which one. Oh, wait, no, I have it saved. Yeah. So he made his CTW map, and his CTW map is, by today's standards, pretty bad. And even by standards back then, it was not very good. I mean, no offense, but it really is a mess. It's just a big open space. But there's a few interesting things to note. Namely, the way the wool rooms are handled, in that they're giant bedrock boxes that have safe zones that extend further out than the interior kind of Vex trademark brick and glass box for the wool. Additionally, there is a large supply of ores. They're still in the form of ores you have to smelt at this point, but there is a large supply. There aren't spawn chests. You actually are expected to punch trees in this and make tools, which is a huge pain. But what this contributes to the evolution of the genre, besides being the first official CTW map, is a larger area around the wool that is safer for the teams. I was pulling up something. Yeah. This was my first CTW map. It was terrible. And it actually was really, even though I started it earlier than Vex, he works way faster than me, so he released his first. Some interesting things to note. This center area of all these floating islands, I did it super arbitrarily at the time, but during the early formative stages of the kind of team-based game mode competitive scene, this was sort of my signature thing in map making, having a lot of floating islands, and I make up a term for it a bit later. One day, there's a small subset of the Mindcrack YouTube community. That's like Pause and Pause was the guy I followed, but he got a few friends. He got like Cilantro Gamer. He got some other people. One of the people involved in this event that Pause was hosting, playing a bunch of multiplayer maps on like a local host server, was someone by the name of Dutroid. Now, Dutroid doesn't even like Minecraft anymore. She's abandoned the game. She wasn't very into it, even when she streamed it. But she saw this map being played on stream, and she had an idea. And she made a map called Airship Battles. Now, I'm going off of CTW for a bit because this is a very big thing that happens. that affects every game mode from here on out in the avenue of the sort of, I don't know how else to describe it, objective matches with teams of like 20 players each. This is where it starts. Airship battles. Now, airship battles is an entirely new game mode, Destroy the Core, where instead of capturing something and bringing it back, there's an objective you must get to, break, and then the game's over. You don't need to get back safely. Something interesting Airship Battles does and adds to every map from there then on out is it uses an overabundance of ore blocks that you can just grab 3 of them and make a full set of armor and get back in the fight. And it uses fully decked out spawn chests that have an entire inventory worth of tools and arrows and TNT. And pretty much every map from then on out starts doing those things. But before that, nobody did that. Airship Battles was a very big thing. You can't see it in this, but this is still at the point in time where it's done in vanilla and you have to walk out of spawn. Here it's using beds in the CTW maps, but Airship Battles, you spawned in the spawn platform and walked to your team's side. That's why spawn tunnels exist on maps that still have them, because that's what they used to be for. Airship Battles is really big, and about 2 weeks go by of Detroit hosting these Sunday community days, and got everyone together in the mumble room. There was like 30 people who got in there, and we were split into red team and blue team. We played it, and then I don't have an image up, but let me go back to, where is it? Yeah, let me go back to Airship Battles. One day, 3 guys, Torn Ares, Thungon, or no, 4 guys, Gamma Ray, 89, which was Bing Bang Brother back at the time, Torn Ares, Thungon, and Nuclear Zebra make Fortress Battles, which is another DTC map, and they give it to Detroit, and it's great. And that just opens the floodgates for people to make community maps of DTC. And the third map to come out and be played is Cake Wars, which I also don't have an image for. And the fourth is, if I remember where it was, is Sky Traffic. Now, I had a complaint with Airship Battles and Fortress Battles, and that was that there wasn't any no man's land to contest. There was only your side and their side and nothing in between. If you had bridged across, you were basically at the core and you were either dead or the game was over. So I made Sky Traffic, which has a shitload of flying boats and balloons and swastikopters, which is what people started calling them. There's some thread on the forums where a guy complained about the propellers looking like swastikas. I'm going on a tangent. Anyways, there's no rhyme or reason to how these are placed, but it creates what I like to call a dynamic front line, where you can push up and gain ground, and the match can evolve, but the match won't then immediately end. You can get flanked, you can get like a forward position, and people with the extreme height variation. Actually, no, I can't attribute Skybridge to Sky Traffic because I specifically picked where it's one of these. Yeah, I specifically picked this image. I'm going to go back to Airship Battles for a minute because I forgot about this. Because of how important the rotors are, people quickly learn that the rotors are really good because they're shorter to bridge from one rotor to the other. You can't see at this angle. And you can carpet bomb the whole thing. People learn that skybridging is really good and start doing it on pretty much every map. And that's no exception on Sky Traffic. Anyways, dynamic frontline becomes my signature thing. Not everyone does it, but the idea of a series of multiple islands becomes mainstream because of this. Now I'm going to hop out of DTC for a bit. One day, these community days are going strong, and we get like loads of community submitted maps, and some of them are bad, some of them are really good. But we in Detroit keep hosting these. One day, 2 guys come into the stream, Monster Apple and Anxious, and they host a creative server called Serenity. And they see a lot of potential for these community days. So they create a plugin called PGM, PvP Game Manager. And they after each community day, they get people from the stream to test it out. And this plugin is meant to automate these matches with the end goal of it being a 24/7 hosted server where people will play these maps in order. And it automates the rules. Because before, with Detroit, you had to walk out of spawn. She broadcasted when a team won in chat. The gold core mode was literally her taking World Edit and changing the obsidian to gold. Like, it was very makeshift, and a bunch of rules were made up on the spot. Sometimes you would just remove the water around the cores because games were taking too long, like manually. But PGM sets out to automize it, and they very much succeed. And before I get into them succeeding, they make Race Victory 1, which is a CTW map that looks a lot like Vex map, but it's not bad like his was. You can tell that it's very similar because the wool boxes in the wool room are brick and glass, just like Vex, even if not exactly. Now, this is the tournament edit for Guardians of the Wool. So this void gap isn't there in the original version of the map, but this map does a lot of the same things Airship Battles did, in that there's iron blocks for armor, there's spawn chests with every tool you could possibly want. Although unlike Airship Battles, it's not practical to go after the enemy supplies. In fact, there's a no enter region for the spawn, which is also fairly new. For most of the DTC maps, supplies were meant to be destructible, and one of the more important things to do would be to defend your supplies so that you don't come out of the spawn tunnel with fucking nothing and just get spawn killed by someone in full diamond armor. RFE 1, you're safe in spawn. There's not even a spawn tunnel because it's the first map using PGM that you just spawn at your spawn. And so the map gets to be also a lot longer as well, because the spawn tunnels on Sky Traffic were fucking huge, which is a good thing because the sides were so small. You wouldn't be able to break the core if the respawn time was like a second. Anyways, RFE1 takes a lot of the good ideas from the early Community Days maps and applies it to the pretty much failed CTW game mode and revitalizes it. A bit later, I'm just picking up images from reference images from anywhere. I'm not trying to promote anyone, by the way. But while the same guys, the same admins of Overcast, the Overcast admins made RFE1, same group of friends makes RFE2. Now, RFE2 is really different. And I think RFE2 is at the point that or PGM is 24/7. So actually, I should talk about that a little bit at least. PGM started out as a plugin to automate community days. Eventually, PGM gets good enough to be a 24/7 server. Apple and Anxious launch it as a 24/7 server, and they make a website and they name it Project Aries. Detroit stopped streaming. Cilantro Gamer, which is significantly more popular than Detroit had like 100 viewers max at like the best, most popular community day events. Cilantro Gamer comes in with like over 1,000 people or some shit, and streams playing on Overcast, or not on Overcast. It's not Overcast yet. It's still Project Aries, and we get a pretty big influx of players. So we have a sizable, consistent community because there's a high player attention to these maps and these game modes. And Project Aries didn't actually become Overcast until the launch of Ghost Squadron in 2013, I believe. But from then on, it was known as the Overcast Network. And besides that, I'm not going to talk much about Overcast because this video is not about Overcast. It's about CTW and what Overcast did to CTW. That's another video, just how they ended up. But anyways, RFE2 is really important because it instead of a singular lane, it makes 2 lanes. And this layout of like an H with a spawn in the middle is a really tired concept by this point. I fucking hate seeing more 2-lane CTWs. But at this point, it's new. And this shows some of the problems with what happened with RFE2. But at this point, it's really fresh and interesting. It's got the whole rotor thing with the high ground of the spawn that you can control and keep people off of, and then use that as a vantage point to get to the objective. People start making crazy defenses, like huge walls, huge pits. People start experimenting with messing with the whole lane to make a defense. Because back in RF1 at that point, it was just like you make a wood wall. People start making water defenses with this map. Lava gets used in interesting ways, and then it's banned because it's overpowered. The bedrock wall setup, back here, you can't see it in this image, but there's like 3 bedrock walls. People get creative with that. This map does a lot. I don't think I even mentioned border control, as this is the first map to do a border control as a bedrock wall above ground. RF2 does a lot, and from there, it influences it becomes the standard for CTW maps for them now, even though it's not played anymore because it's so old and everyone knows how to like exploit the map. It's very comparable to direct fire because it just sets the standard for everything. It set the standard actually for what I'm known for, which is Golden Drought. Now let me head back into Minecraft. Golden Drought 1 basically goes like this. I'm in school one day. I'm fucking bored because I hate my first year of high school. And I'm sitting in class and I pull out a piece of paper and I start sketching a CTW map because I'm like, oh wow, CTW is getting popular, and I had something to do with the creation of it, even though I just inspired a guy to go do it himself. So I say, I want to make a good CTW map. I'm like, what is a good CTW map? I know, RFE2 is a good CTW map. I'm going to take that and base it off of RFE2. So I take the RFE2 lanes and I bend them, and it's just diagonal because I want it to look different, even though it's not really all that different. But there's a few important changes I make. I recognize that stone takes way too long to mine pits, so I change it to sandstone, which mines faster. I'm of the opinion at this time that the difference between having no armor and iron armor is way too big, so I change it to gold, and you make gold armor. And you have stone swords to compensate, and that's pretty cool. And I take my idea of dynamic front lines and I apply it in a more rigid, not clusterfucky sense that Sky Traffic was, and I make a grid of islands at the front lines. And I also think that border control, that RF2's approach to the pre-made defense is kind of lame. And I want defenses to be only as strong as the person who's actively defending them. I don't want them to be big walls. I don't want them to be like my original idea for CTW as a spin-off of RFEW, Race for Wool, is that the defenses would be the players, not a big dungeon. And by having players make essentially giant dungeons for the other team, that ruins the point. So instead of making a big wall, I make a narrow height difference influenced choke point for players to defend. And this is back in 2012, which is a pretty big thing. And people love it. Golden Drought 1 is a huge hit. This is still at the point when XML isn't a thing, and the owners have to manually add maps to the repository. So there's some sort of like moderation that happens there in terms of what gets in, but not really, because shit like Avalanche got in and ended up on Nostalgia for some reason, even though that map's awful. But anyways, Apple loves it. He sees it and he likes it. I get second opinions from Hobo, who helped with the Race for World maps, and some other guy. I get him to do some busy work for it. But mostly it's a solo project. It comes out. Turns out, fun fact, the height limit on Golden Drought 1 was actually meant to be 10 blocks lower. And the fact that people skybridge everywhere, and that's what the map's known for, that's actually a mistake. But I don't change it because people love it. I was tempted to a few times, but I didn't. Then RFE3 comes around, which I don't have an image for. And public maps get a little bit... They get less structured. The lanes start to curve because void regions are becoming really becoming a thing now, where you can just say in this region you can't build if there's void at y equals 0 with the XML config files. And that opens up people to do really creative stuff with lanes. And from there, stuff gets crazy. Public maps come out that are nuts. Sometime down the line, Battle Ecliptica, which I hate, makes 4-team CTWs, and people start trying to make 4-team CTWs. None of them are good. I could name a lot of stuff, but nothing... There's a clear progression after RFE3, but nothing influences public maps in a huge way after that. And you can see where public maps are at now. I mean, Golden Drought 1 is still played in pubs. It's still a pub map. I mean public match gameplay. But that's basically the brief history of how CTW came to be. But while public maps got to the point where it's no longer recognizable what's influencing what, the same is not so true of the tournament scene. Now, I could talk a lot about how the competitive scene grew on Overcast before it died. But I'm going to specifically talk about the tournaments where CTW was relevant. First, Raiders of the Lost Wool, I believe, was in 2012, back when the server was still Project Ares. It was just a bunch of pub maps with people who tried really hard to figure out how to be the best at those pub maps. This was at the point in time where tournament map pools were just a selection of what people thought were the best maps. And each round was a different one-map match of a different map. So you would play the 6 maps in the pool one at a time. You'd play one in the round of 32, one in the round of 16, one in the quarterfinals, one in semis, one in finals. And most tournaments before 2014 were like that. Sometime later, there's Guardians of the Wool. Now, at this point, this is coming off of Breaking Core. I played in Breaking Core, and Breaking Core is a DTC tournament where a lot of interesting things happen. People learned how to Icarus a bit better. People learned how to water very effectively. And people were breaking a lot of maps in Breaking Core, which was a new experience for people. Like, there were really popular maps that were just unplayable because at the highest level, people had figured out crazy shit. And I think the tournament before that was a mixed game mode tournament where RFE2 was irreparably damaged. Let me pull up. People learned how to, like... RFE2 is interesting because RFE2 didn't actually get broken and that some crazy strategy came up. It's that no more new strategies were coming. And it was really boring to play because it always tied, because the defenses were too strong and you couldn't skybridge very well. And the only thing you could ever do was just skybridge to the top area up here, try and bridge and hope that the defender wasn't watching. It wasn't very interesting. So RFE2 was, after years of being the premier best CTW map out there, stopped being played in tournaments. Then Guardians of the Wool is coming around, and Electroid Films is the guy in charge of the tournament maps at this point. He's on the event staff team, and he's a map dev. He's also looking to become a developer. He's also one of the most active moderators. He's working with the admins. He's super busy and does not have the time to go through all the maps and review them and watch them be play tested. He's just super busy at this point. Now, I had just played in Breaking Core, and I was on Vindicate, I believe. And our team didn't do so great. We almost won against Starfish, actually, in round 4 of the round robin. But it was only because we got super lucky and because we were able to stalemate a terrible map. Blocks DTC. Not a good map. But almost let us win. And there is a high scrutiny on the maps now. Because of Blocks DTC doing so badly in Breaking Core, there's scrutiny on the maps being good. And the map pool is highly debated for Guardians of the Wool. In it, I believe, was GD3, Golden Drought 3, which was, I think ranked was out at this point on Overcast. Like pub matches, but supposedly competitive, kind of. And GD3 was the best map on ranked in most people's opinions, I think. I don't fully remember. I didn't play much on ranked. And so it was kind of an auto-include for the tournament at that point. Deepwind wasn't played on ranked, but it was a decent tournament map in that it wasn't necessarily broken yet. There were problems with it, but there weren't. It was still playable. It was still usable, and it still made it for interesting matches at the high level of play, even if it was frustrating. Ring Race was another popular one before then, but it was not. It was starting to. The problems are starting to show. Ring Race is a very gimmicky map, and that's just huge, and you got a skybridge a super long distance. So Ring Race is out. G3 and Deepwind were like the good choices. And then there was Golden Drought 1, which honestly I was planning to go to Electroid and veto that map because I didn't think there were so many problems with Golden Drought 1 in competitive that weren't really exploited earlier. The frontline pits were like super easy to set up. Making a frontline defense in general is really overpowered because it's hard to see immediately, but the front lines actually come down to the area of a single island at the point that the lanes diagonally meet at the front. And if you just set up your defense there, you don't actually have to split up your back defenders. Your two back defenders can together shoot at the same guy. And anyone coming out of spawn can assist in defense. It's actually kind of crazy. So I was planning to not let GD1 be in the map pool for Guardians of the Wool because of that. And then there's Fairy Tales 2, which was a really bad map for competitive. I never liked it. Some people did, but there were so many problems with the front lines coming down to like this weird ass choke point. Like the Skybridge regions didn't make any sense. The defense lanes had no bedrock walls, and there were void gaps that you could use for defenses. It was a mess, and I knew it was going to go very badly if people got their hands on it and found out how to do things in the most effective manner. So I'm not the only one who has this idea, actually, that I need to go to Electroid and kind of influence what ends up in the pool for the sake of quality. I go to Electroid and I'm like, we can't have Fairy Tales 2. That's a terrible idea. And he says, well, we don't really have any other options. We're good. We were decent friends at the time. We worked together on the map dev team together. We got along. So he valued my opinion, even though I was a player in that tournament. I got off Vindicant and was on Polaris. Cretane was the leader of the premier, pretty much best team at that point after the original Badlion team disbanded and kind of scattered, and Starfish didn't even disband. They just disappeared off the face of the earth like 2 tournaments before that. Actually, no. They disappeared for Breaking Core, both of them, I think, after Lunglove stomped them. I end up on Polaris with a few Hungercraft buddies. Anyways, myself and Cretane end up individually influencing Electroid. Cretane and Matt Susan, who's the leader of Kudo and Team Grief, which was Cretane's team, were like the best teams at the time. They end up editing and getting RFE1 in the pool, which is this version of it, and they do some cool stuff to it to try and make it more viable. It's not really a CTW map anymore because the limited supplies and the super long lane and the lava, just how the supplies are handled is not very representative of what the game mode means anymore, because it's more representative of what airship battles was at the time, of like you can starve out your opponent of supplies, of like spaceship battles, which was another old map that only stood the test of time through a bunch of different edits. Starving your opponent out of supplies was not a very CTW thing. It didn't happen in CTW maps. But it did make for interesting matches at higher levels of play, and it did make for interesting matches this tournament. And then I decided I need to make something better than Fairy Tales 2. So I sat down and I made Wit's End, and that got into the map pool because I persuaded Electroid. It was played first round in case it was bad, so it would minimize damage. It turned out to be pretty good during the tournament, but a few very important things competitively happened that tournament. Firstly, something called communal skybridge. Now let me go back to GD3, this GD3 remake here. Let me try and illustrate to you how this works. Essentially, when people, at this point, people always started their skybridge with a staircase, and people staircased everywhere, which is another problem. It's what broke RFV2, honestly, the fact that everyone just made staircases at front lines. But people would skybridge like this, and I think this is the height limit. Yeah, this is about the height limit, approximately. Somewhere around here is where your skybridge would end up after you've hit the height limit. And your opponent's skybridge, if I line this up correctly, would be about here. Now, it turns out that this gap right here, both of you, if you want to continue skybridging, have to fill in that gap. Both of you have to work at it. Except people realized it doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be us. We don't have to be the ones to fill in this gap. What if we, instead of putting 3 people on skybridge at the start of the game, put 1 person on skybridge? He just sits here. He shoots at the other guy. You have one of the extra people just work on making the staircase up the skybridge unwaterable. Because what people figured out how to do once people started using staircases is that they use water buckets and they cover it in water. So what people did is they placed a shitload of signs everywhere, like 4 tall, to make it impossible to block off the staircase. So you could run straight out of the spawn and get immediately back up on skybridge, which broke Deepwind. And so once the other teams dedicated a shitload of resources they didn't need to, you just gained a whole lot, like a huge advantage in terms of your player spread, and they connect the skybridge finally. Then you just put people up there and you start contesting, and they've gained nothing by putting in the effort when you didn't want to. And what this does, once both teams realizes it, that they can do this, nobody fucking skybridges. The skybridge just doesn't get completed. Both people make a tower and they shoot a lot, but nobody actually bridges anywhere. And this is a huge problem because at this point, especially for this and Wit's End, people make huge ass defenses that only get bigger and bigger as the game goes on. And past like 20 minutes of a match, because these matches go on for 45 minutes, the only way for a match to end is through skybridging or Riley Numbers getting super lucky. He was a guy who played on Impact, and he had some clutch moments multiple times, multiple matches in a row. Just a reference there. Anyways, Communal Skybridge definitively breaks Golden Drought 3 in competitive this tournament, and Wit's End, which had a short-lived lifetime. It was good while it lasted. RFV1 is not going to last another tournament. Deepwind gets broken by the staircase thing with the signs. Golden Drought 1 wasn't even good. I was going to veto it, but we needed 6 maps. And I forget what the last map in the pool was. Let me try. I actually have notes here that I'm not using. Oh, Next Gen. Next Gen is a RFV2 remake. I should have pulled up a picture of Next Gen. So Next Gen is also by Cretane and Matt Susan. And Electroid. They work together on that one, I believe. Actually, it might have been just Electroid. I don't even remember at this point. Next Gen is basically just like RFV1. It's a patchwork change just to add new strategies. Because the problem with RFV2 is that it just didn't have any more ideas to present. And so it just... Next Gen adds more ideas. The original version of Next Gen only lasts for 1 tournament. And future versions of Next Gen only last for 1 tournament. And that's basically how it goes later on. Now, after Guardians of the Wool, CTW is like broken, basically. And nobody's ready for this. Nobody's ready for, like, literally every CTW map that everyone thought was good is no longer playable. And so my team disbands. Polaris dies at this point. It reforms sometime later, but I'm not part of it. So having gotten 3 maps in the pool and having talked directly to Electroid and told him what he should include and made a map specifically for that tournament and it was played, I go up to Hazi, who's basically the head of the referee team at this point, the admin in charge of events. And I say, you need someone who has the time to dedicate solely to maps. Someone who just does the tournament maps only. Because Electroid obviously is too busy to do this. My team disbanded. Do you guys want me? And Hazi says yes. And I join the events team. I have no referee training. They tell me, we're not going to put you on referee stuff. You're not reffing matches. And I say, I don't fucking want to. I don't even moderate very much anymore. I join the events team on Overcast and start doing maps. First thing I do on Overcast is I start working on Conquest. Now, one of the things I really didn't like about the format of tournaments is I mentioned this earlier, but each round in the tournament having a different map associated with it. Because Breaking Core, the invitationals were called Breaking Bracket, because there was a team that practiced only the first round match because they had a really strong opponent, and they actually won that, and then had practiced none of the other maps. So they just upset first round and then got stomped. Because you can do that with that format. Because the other team was practicing for the later rounds, because those were the tougher opponents that they were up against, supposedly. So that was, not only did the format have problems, it also, I wanted a smaller map pool so that people could push the metagame on a map to its absolute extreme, and you can only make so many maps that are like that can actually support being pushed to their absolute extreme. And very few of them ever existed. SSB, Spaceship Battles, was one of them. And a few, RFE2 lasted for a while. Nothing had really lasted forever. And the point wasn't to last forever. The point was to last for one tournament. But the competitive community really wanted these maps where they could go absolutely crazy and discover crazy stuff, because they were doing some rather insane things. I'm just going to get rid of that. That's my goal with Conquest. Now, what Conquest was, it was a tournament specifically so that the same maps were played every round. And it was only 3 maps in a best of 3 series. Now, in order to do this, a lot of testing had to happen. The 3 maps were Facility, Ascendance, and I'm explaining this because this affects how competitive is treated in the future, by the way. Facility, Ascendance, and Limbo 2. Facility already existed. I made some edits. I tested it for a lot, and it worked out because it already worked before. It worked in mixed game mode tourneys since forever. And people aren't discovering new stuff on maps without block interaction. Not really. Not anything game-changing, at least. Limbo 2. Limbo 1 was an interesting map that had a bunch of problems. I go to Panda Boy, who made Limbo 1, and I say, I want Limbo 2 to look like this. It's just Limbo 1 without the problems it had before. And he makes it, and it's really straightforward. It's just a King of the Hill map where you rotate from points, and you just gotta keep track of your opponent and outmaneuver them as a team. And doesn't have any glaring flaws. It just works. Ascendance is a little bit more interesting. I won't get into it too much, but Ascendance was the product of me having an idea and spending a straight few months playtesting and making edits and refining it. And this entire tournament, like I said, is a test run for this idea of having a more concise map pool, and it works really damn well. Conquest goes really great. None of the maps are broken. They're all great. People love them. And from then on out, the strategy is to have less maps but better maps for the most part. House of Cores happens, and I'm actually not around for House of Cores. So they get Cretane to help with a bunch of the maps for that, I believe. After House of Cores, though, is Age of Ares. Now, Age of Ares comes around, and Breaking Core or not Breaking Core, but House of Cores was like the last nail in the coffin for DTC, or Destroy the Core maps, because people learned to just abuse water in the craziest ways. Icaruses and water walls are like the only thing that matters in Spaceship Battles, which was the best map, and now it's almost unplayable after that. So Age of Ares, as a mixed tournament, we couldn't even find one Destroy the Core map. So we ended up using Cake Wars. I think, wait, I don't remember for Age of Ares. Did we have Cake Wars and Spaceship Battles? Or just Cake Wars? I don't even remember. Anyways, Destroy the Core is basically harmed in the same way that Capture the Wool was. And Capture the Wool hasn't even recovered at this point. Capture the Wool is still fairly damaged. And we end up making another patchwork version of Next Gen for Age of Ares. We add like these void lanes on the side that you can have as a late game Skybridge option that doesn't go through the enemy spawn. And that works out pretty well for that tournament. But yeah, we also mess around with Capture the Flag, which is not part of this video. What's important about Age of Ares is that I get more people on the team. I'm going to list them off. I get Cretane officially on the tournament map team. I get Strange Boy 1, this Strange Boy 1, who's now just goes by Strangey on the map team. Strange gets some of his friends who helped him with maps to help out as well. Claff, Triple Z KO. I get Nixania XI, who helped after Conquest, people started making more 5 CP maps, 5 capture point maps. And Nix made a really good one, Smoke. He just appeared out of nowhere and made Smoke, and it was good. And we talked to him, and we got him to keep making good maps. Doomboy at some point got involved. But anyways, the team expands. I start bossing people around for Age of Ares. There's a CTF map where I make in like a day because I can't get anyone else to make a good one. I get Strange to make it look nice. It was a fun time, even though I still regret Age of Ares Cake Wars. Then Overcast, at this point, the competitive community is really asking the Overcast administration for an anti-cheat, which we don't get. We keep asking for it. There's talks of making auto-click detection. It doesn't ever happen, unfortunately. And the competitive community is at the point where it's ready to expand. It's ready to grow. It's ready to reach larger viewership because there's some really awesome stuff happening in these tournaments and these matches that like people would want to see. But Overcast, the administration isn't putting in the resources to advertise, isn't putting in the resources to make prize pools, and isn't putting in the resources for an anti-cheat. And those were my 3 complaints. And all of those have to do with the fact that they just weren't spending the money. And so at some point after a year and a half of this, because I joined and I asked for these things back in like after Guardians of the Wool, and I'm asking for these after Age of Ares, and it's just after Conquest 2, I think, actually, that happens at some point. It's just a bunch of the Conquest maps, but it's a bigger pool because we got more of them. Anyways, I resigned from Overcast in June of 2016, I believe, because I can't justify spending that much time if they can't put in the resources to continue expanding at the same rate that the community is, at the same rate that the metagame has been pushed to its limit. And I actually don't put anyone in charge, but in my absence, Strange and Cretane kind of take up the reins, and they at that point they were definitely more than capable of doing what I did for Conquest for future tournaments. Then, just a few months later, after I resigned, it turns out Overcast not only didn't have the money to buy like advertising and a new developer to make an anti-cheat, they didn't have the money to keep running. And I have a few theories about like why that was and what led to like the decline of Overcast, but that's another video. Anyways, Overcast shuts down, and they have some nostalgia tournament. Lifeboat acquires them and says, "Hey, now that our name's attached to it, you'll be better now, right?" That doesn't work out. Lifeboat shuts them down again a few months later. After the initial Overcast shutdown, the one where before the Overcast buyout, Badlion announces that they want to move into overcast game modes. I start talking to Badlion. I help them with their CTF tournament. I do the edits for the CTF maps and whatnot. But this isn't about CTF. What's interesting is that while I was working on the CTF stuff for Badlion, and Lifeboat was doing a really bad job of revitalizing Overcast. Lifeboat, it's now Lifeboat, not Overcast. They host a CTW tourney, Kung Fu Capture, and they do some really interesting stuff for CTW because at this point, none of the old CTW maps are any good. Like I said, the problems with CTW are a few things. One, communal skybridge, and that your map is just too big from where people start their skybridge. Two, people staircase everywhere, and suddenly a bridge across a void gap turns into a skybridge, and the people on the ground can't do anything about it. Three, long, huge late game defenses that just keep scaling to get bigger and bigger and bigger, especially without skybridges being important. Namely, that was a problem in a fundamental game design sense, and that as the match progresses, as defenses get bigger, it actually got further from a conclusion on some maps. That was a big problem with RFE2, was those defenses. And I think there was one more. I don't know if there was one more. But anyways, the maps for Kung Fu Capture set out to change this. And I wasn't around, and I don't know some of the maps very well. I've picked this clip from this stream of Strange's Bamboo Valley 5? I think it was 5. As an example of solutions to some of these problems. The defenses are very limited in how crazy you can make them, because the bedrock is very much against the player. Maps from this point, from Kung Fu Capture onwards, start being against the player in terms of their bedrock placement, or against the defender at least. They make it very hard to make an effective defense and start challenging traditional defense designs. The elevation is really weird. You can't make a good pit anywhere, which is a problem. Encouraging defenders to spend forever on a pit was never worked out in a healthy way, at least. People liked doing it, but didn't make for interesting matches. There's a huge element of verticality in that you see a lot of staircases around, but all of the staircases that people are making end up somewhere. They don't end up above the map. They don't end up at skybridge height. They end up on another platform. Every gap has an elevation associated with it that's meant to facilitate people staircasing. It's no longer something that people do to kind of get an advantage over the map. It's something they're expected to do. And all of the maps in this tournament do that. Secondly, this is also how they break up communal skybridge, in that there are parts of the front line, the no man's land in the center, I guess not front. I mean, you can see in this that there's one side that's super pushed up compared to the other. So it's not like a straight line or anything. But there are parts of it that are so high up that you can get to skybridge from the ground easier. You can contest it in more interesting ways. So you can just, instead of having to start your skybridge from the back and being a huge pain, you can just start skybridge from the middle of the map. If they're really turtling at their side, you can turn that. The skybridge then becomes easier instead of harder if they play super defensively. And all of these things culminate into this tournament actually going pretty well, and the map's doing pretty okay. Some of them weren't as good because all of them were new, and I can't speak for which ones those were as much as the people directly involved. But this element of verticality and refinement of defense lanes does a lot for the health of the game mode competitively. Now, that's basically CTW up until now. Lifeboat dies. Or not, Lifeboat doesn't die because they're a successful Pocket Edition server who are borderline egotistical if they thought that their brand was going to save Overcast alone, because they didn't really do much else other than attach their brand name to it. At least from what I saw, I didn't work for Lifeboat at all. That's just what it looked like to me. No hard feelings, guys. After Lifeboat is officially gone, the guys who stuck over there for this tournament. Cretane, Strange, and Strange's friends, Nixania, they come to Badlion as well. They're now part of the team. And before I get into what Badlion's doing with CTW, I want to quickly go over the changes to this, because I promised that I would be re-releasing this. So the problems with GD3 were that people were... I mean, the defense lanes are actually not so bad. People are learning a staircase. Like, most of these... The defenses actually got worse when people learned a staircase, because people would staircase from here. Like, if you make a big wall here, this is at the perfect angle so that your staircase hits the top of it. If you start your pit here, there's like a... I don't know why this isn't loading. If you start your pit here, you can start here and staircase over like a water defense. Once people got really good at staircasing, defenses got less effective. But it still has that element of you can sink a lot of time into some cool defense. And for public maps, that's fine. That's cool. People like doing that. People like doing that with like 6 people, and the game never ends. And those games are actually fun because you make some crazy stuff. And honestly, having 6 people on defense, regardless of what you make, is going to be effective. There's no way around that. On any map, if you put half your team on defense, it's going to work. The other problem... So that wasn't actually a big problem on this map. The biggest problem was communal skybridge on this map. And I've solved that by raising the islands. These were all raised like 1 block before, but now these are up 3 blocks and these are up 8. And that puts them closer to the height limit so that you can staircase off this. And specifically, the raised islands are on the side now, so you can skybridge straight from them towards the wall. And you staircase like a few blocks, and you hit the height limit about here, I think. So yeah, that's the major change in terms of the actual layout. The other change is that when I made Golden Drought 3, there are 6 faces of a piston that you can have face, but if you have piston with the 7th damage value, you actually get... I'm in a version where this is still the case. Let me show you what this looks like. The pistons were all piston 6, and they look like this. And it was great because I could have pistons on corners. I could just not do them manually. I could just set the whole map to pistons like this. Next update, Mojang removes piston 6 from the game. They're just no longer a thing, and all the pistons look like garbage because they're all facing sideways. So the other thing with this release is I'm making it look nice again. All the pistons, I mean, there's still some that are on the corner, and you can still see the sides of them, but most of them are oriented in a reasonable way. So that's nice. I won't be releasing a current XML with this because at this point, there's XML out there for it, and I haven't changed anything that would require the XML to be changed. And there are plenty of servers out there that use their own versions of XML. Badlion's using JSON. I know Avacus is using YML. So that would be not really worth my time, honestly. So now let's get into what Badlion's doing with CTW. I'm not going to be showing off most of the maps. Right now, the public maps on Badlion are not very interesting. There's a bunch of popular public maps from Overcast made by myself and Strange. We just pulled them over. We got permission from a few other people for a few different maps. They're just in rotation. Me and Strange made a new map called Shade Hollow Falls that I made for the specific purpose of introducing people to water defenses. It looks like garbage. Anyways. Let me just show off Golden Drought 5. Let me remove this sponge. Now, fun fact, there are actually about 12 different maps in the Golden Drought franchise, I fucking guess at this point. Of course, 7 of them are spin-offs, but there are a lot of spin-offs. I guess that was the fun fact. So, what Badlion's doing for their competitive is they're specifically doing 5v5, which wasn't really done in the tournament. Let me talk about 5v5 for a bit, actually. Badlion, when they announced that they would be doing 5v5 and they hosted the 5v5 Build UHC tournament, Cretane brought to Overcast this idea of working with 5v5, because if it's a game that has a competitive player base and competitive teams out there, you don't want to have different tournaments with different team sizes necessarily. Even if it's different organizations, you don't see CSGO tournaments that have not 5v5. You don't see Overwatch that does Overwatch tournaments for 3v3, not really. You don't see League of Legends 3v3 tournaments out there. It's just not really a thing. It's just better to be consistent about it. And Cretane makes the argument that 5v5 is better than what we have now, which was 8v8 and 10v10. And the admins at Overcast, I'm trying to find the word, because it's buy into it makes it sound like he was scamming them or something, which is not really what happened. But they accept it, I guess. And Overcast decides, they announce that they want to do 5v5. They never actually really get anywhere with 5v5. Because it turns out it's really easy to just pick a number for something like Build UHC, but it's not so easy to pick a number for Destroy the Core, Capture the Wool, 5CP. These game mode maps, player spreads really matter. And changing the team size from 10 to 8 was a huge deal on a bunch of maps. Changing them to 5, you have to make entirely new maps and rethink how you approach the game mode. So we never actually, I don't think Overcast ever actually had a 5v5 tournament. There might have been one that I wasn't around for in the Lifeboat era. But there was a lot of talk about it in the forums, and people were not very happy about it. Archie actually was not very happy about it. He thought Overcast was just copying Badlion, which, I mean, they kind of were. I don't know. I won't comment on it because I now work for Badlion. It's no longer relevant because that portion is not relevant because Overcast no longer exists. But the goal of moving Overcast to 5v5 was for the whole competitive Minecraft community to exist under the same flag, because Race for Wool already existed at like 4v4 and 5v5. So bringing down team sizes to match that actually kind of made some sense even back then. Anyways, the point is, the Overcast tournament map team, myself, Cretane, Strange, a bunch of others, we were messing with 5v5 all the way back then, back before Lifeboat was involved. And while we never got results back then, we definitely are familiar with what 5v5 should be like. And while there are a lot of players out there like 5v5 sounds like a dumb idea, Overcast never got it to work, we actually got very close in the maps we tested. Of course, we never got a tournament out because a bunch of complications happened. Overcast shut down, Lifeboat came in, and they had different ideas. And Cretane went off to college and wasn't able to voice his opinion nearly as much. But there was progress made with 5v5 and Overcast, and the same people who made that progress are now here at Badlion and are not only very intimately familiar with the game modes that they're porting over the 5v5, but have quite a bit of experience with 5v5 team sizes from the time spent testing some of those prototype maps, which none of them worked in the long run. Wits End 2 was one of them. Didn't turn out very well. But the point I'm trying to make is have some faith in the team behind this. Now let me explain GD5 because I've been looking around it for a bit. Just like how I pointed out some of the most recent changes to the CTW metagame and changes I made to GD3, I'm going to explain how they're addressed in this map. First off, Communal Skybridge isn't a problem because of how, you start your Skybridge from front lines, it hits the height limit at the middle. You're good. That's not going to be an issue. Height limit is I think it's, I set it to 20. So exactly at this height. So right here. So staircasing up 5 blocks from the highest point, you're not going to be that high up. This map is not meant to be a Skybridge map, even though other Golden Drop maps have been. Fun fact by accident. This will not be one. I guess, at least not up here. Maybe down here, but there's not really anything to Skybridge to because the entrances to the wool room are both on this side. But yeah. Communal Skybridge, not a problem. Verticality and staircasing, everything's laid out very effectively. Let me show this off. You staircase up here, and suddenly you're right here 6 blocks from that, and you would go out straight. Staircase there, you go up like a few blocks, and then you're at the perfect height to jump down. If you keep going, I think at the point you hit the height limit is the point at which you can make the jump, and I think I made that intentional. Yeah, actually that's 6 above. Yeah, okay. But the point at which you hit the height limit with the staircase from here is the point at which you can make the jump. The staircase, this is lined up so that at the point you hit the same height as this, you can make the jump. Whatever. Every gap is made with staircase in mind. I guess I should explain the layout of the islands here and how the map is very deliberately only rotationally symmetrical. It's not mirrored down the middle. It's not like R3T or Golden Drought 1 where there's a line of symmetry down the two sides. And it's intentionally quite lopsided. You have a height advantage on your left as opposed to your right where you start in the bottom. Your left is the side that you come in, their enemy's going to come in on the wall, and you'd have to push right, which is your weaker side, to get into it. Because if you push left, you get to their spawn. It's not very helpful. And that's done sort of deliberately so that you can set up this diagonal line of scrimmage where there's a lot of opportunities to flank your opponent. Set up someone who's over here. Like you're having a firefight with this guy here, and some guy takes the opportunity to bridge from there. I'm actually taking my hand off my mouse and pointing to things on my screen like a fucking idiot. I should stop doing that. Anyways, a diagonal line of scrimmage across multiple islands allows for opportunities for teams to take advantage of that and start flanking. This bottom area here is meant to be very precarious. It's narrow. You can get shot or knocked off really easy. You can actually make this jump here if you're not bad. Just from the side islands. That's meant to be eternally a no man's land. You don't want to be standing there for an extended period of time. But if nobody's watching you, if you're off spawn killing them or something, it's a straight lane to the wool. Now let me talk about the wool a bit. One of the problems I mentioned is that defenses just get stronger over the course of the match, and the match goes away from its completion. The solution to that originally was, still is on a lot of maps, the expansion of a sky bridge, which is very hard to get rid of. It wasn't on Wit's End, which was interesting. That did some interesting stuff, but I don't think we're ever going to go back to having insta-ignite TNT to blow up Skybridge. That was interesting once, and not something that really fits with what Badlion's trying to do here. Anyways, the idea of an ever-expanding defense, there's a few solutions to that. One, that a bunch of the Kung Fu Capture maps did, is you can only expand it so much. Like, you really, there isn't a perfect defense design that is going to encompass everything. You can't make that big of a pit. Your walls are a pain in the ass to maintain and create. Just about anything you go with is going to have flaws. And there's an interesting dynamic to that of having a defense setup where you have to weigh and choose your options, and all of your different designs are going to have upsides and downsides. But that's not actually what's happening on this map. If you look at this slope, you'll notice immediately, if you've played CTW maps before competitively, that this looks terrible for an offense player. Namely, because any defender who's worth their salt is going to take a bucket, and they're going to cover this thing in water. And this is going to be suffering to play, to offend up this slope. Because, water is awful. It's counted as being in the air. You get knocked a little bit further. It slows you down. It pushes you backwards if you open your inventory. You try to shift. The normal counter to water defense is either to staircase over it, which is only so helpful because you'd be staircasing at the same height, because you'd just be staircasing parallel to it, or to tunnel under it, which is technically possible, but you'll actually find that unless you're tunneling on the outside, you have to tunnel 2 blocks below the surface, which isn't enough space to tunnel. because you have to, right? Like you have to surface every block, which isn't going to work out. So neither of those two things are really viable. So what's the point? The point is you can push up the other side and push this. You can destroy this portion of the bridge, but not that. And you can, I mean, sometimes people are going to be able to staircase up this or find a solution, but it's very hard. The way that that's balanced is that water is very scarce. You don't get water buckets. Now, there are maps that have tried to make water scarce before. Next Gen only puts sources of water in the middle of the map, which means at the start of the match, if you do really well at the start, for the rest of the game, your opponent doesn't get any water because you pick it up in buckets and you cover it up and you take it back to your defense. The only way they're going to get water now is if they go to your defense, and instead of bringing back the wool, they bring back a bucket of water, which they're not going to do. I'm not a fan of that personally because having, because that like, it still has the problem of you having infinite water to spend. It's just maybe you can force your opponent to not have it. Other maps are, they only have one source of water. Because if you've played with water before, you would know that if you have two water blocks diagonally, this block here becomes a new source block. And you can take a bucket and you can pick it up and it fills back in. I'm in creative now, so this bucket isn't actually filling up. It's staying empty, but in survival it would. So you can make infinite water from two water source blocks. So what they do is they only put one source block on the map. Wow. That turns out to be really not helpful. You can only do so much unless you make your defense specifically to be created with one source block, kind of like the one I have set up here. It's not very helpful at all. And you can, I mean, back then, most maps were 8v8 and had 2 lanes, so you can only make one water defense on one side. How useless is that? They would just push the worst defense. If your defenses aren't the same design, they just push the one that they find easier. They're always going to go after the easier defense. So your defense is only as strong as your weakest point, because that's how offenders are going to make their choices. So what this map does is instead of giving people buckets, they only give out ice blocks. Now, there's one ice block in each of these side islands, and there's 7 in the middle. Now, the reason it's ice blocks isn't because I want to limit how much water you can place. You can still actually make infinite sources. You can still make a puddle of water diagonally with ice blocks. No, the defense is made so that you can do it with one source block. But you can only do it with one source block as many times as you have a block of ice. Let's say, hypothetically, a offender gets pretty far. Like, they get close to the top, or they get into the wool, but they don't make it back. What they're going to do is they're going to stop the water. And now that source block is off the map. Meaning, if you, by playing offense, you make the defense weaker, because the opposing team is going to run out of water eventually, because they've only gathered, so even maybe they only get one. And once you play offense, you get one good offensive push as a team, and you block up the water. Maybe the push fails, but if you block up the water, the defense is weaker as the match progresses, which is something that has never actually been done on the map before. Maybe it won't work, but one of the longest solutions, or one of the longest existing problems for Capture the Wool, since some of the first Capture the Wool maps, is that defenses can get too big, and they just get bigger as the match goes on. This Golden Trap 5 theoretically has a solution that makes defenses smaller as the match progresses, which I'm super proud about, if you hadn't guessed by me talking about it for as long as I have. But yeah, I mean, but yeah, that's pretty much the whole map. The rest of it you can see for yourself. I mean, the wool gear is just gapples and an iron chestplate. The spawns are all the way back here. There's pretty much indefinite supply of gold close to it. Even if you run out here, there's like more on the roof you can get to if you build up on the outside. The bedrock is only 4 blocks below. Actually, it's only 3 blocks below. So you can just barely... This is what I did on Wit's End, actually. You can just barely tunnel underneath the surface. But if you break the top layer, you're going to be exposed. So you can technically tunnel. It's not going to be easy. And it's going to be easy to find someone who's tunneling. If I want to make an anti-tunneling defense, literally the only thing you have to do, or I would have to do, is to dig a line across the top. And I would just see them. But yeah, that's GD5. That's kind of what this kind of stuff is on the other maps. I'm not going to show them yet because they're not my maps, but they'll be out on Scrim servers soon, around the time this is uploaded. You might be viewing this video after the first CTW tournaments happen. Maybe you already know that this map turns out to be terrible, and all of them turn out to be terrible, and Badlion's gone bankrupt. I don't know. At the point that I'm recording this video, the tournament hasn't happened yet, and Scrim servers aren't up, and this is the first place this is going to be revealed if I upload it on time. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I'm hoping you're looking forward to Badlion going into overcast old game modes as much as I am. Peace.